everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. Today I'm starting my December reading wrap up. It is currently December 10th and I just finished my first book of the month. I'm a little bit worried. I have to read seven more books to get to my reading goal this year. So this is a bit of a reading challenge, shall we say. Yes, so I wanted to wrap up the first book that I finished, which is an audiobook called A Snowy Little Christmas. It was a novella with three novellas in one. Oh no, I'm not going to remember everyone's names, so I'm going to put down the names here. There was Fern was the first one I listened to. And that one was called Snowden for Christmas, I think. There's a bookstore involved. There's all three of them had snow, so I guess that's why they called it A Snowy Christmas. The bind up or whatever. The narration was pretty good. I wouldn't say I loved it necessarily. The last story has dual chapters, male, female perspectives, and so they had two narrators for that, a male narrator and a female narrator. But what I wish they would have done, which I'm sure they couldn't do due to production, was have the male and female narrators do the dialogue in each other's parts, because it ended up being very weird to hear the female narrator talking about using a weird accent for the male when that's not the way the male narrator spoke. So that was a little disjointed for me, but overall I enjoyed them. I think I might be becoming a little bit more relaxed about romance as a genre and accepting what it is in the moment when I'm listening to it and reading it. It's just not a genre that I'm going to read a lot of because of the kind of formulaic nature of it. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was entertaining. It was Christmassy. It was festive. And so yeah, I'm glad that I picked that one up. I'm going to pick out another audiobook right away and keep going to try to help me to achieve my reading goals. Because audiobooks are just great to fit into those moments where you can't sit down and physically read, but I do need to actually sit down and physically read as well. The issue being, of course, that it's December, and along with all the regular life things going on, it's also the holidays and decorating and yeah, all the things that go along with being a human, and then you've got to do all the holiday magic at the same time. So just trying to figure that out these last few days. Anyway, I'll check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey everyone. Okay, I finished Menewood by Nicola Griffith. This is a sequel to her novel Hild, and it is about Hild Yiffing, who was a real person, but has a very brief mention in the history of England. And Nicola Griffith created this incredible character out of her historical record. So we don't know if she did all these things, but it doesn't matter to me because she is an absolutely incredible figure. I think that her persona, her character is just so rich and wonderful. I loved both Hild and Menewood so much. I think what I love about these books is just there's a beauty in imagining this time in the world, a time where things were like much more dangerous, much more precarious, much more scary in so many ways, but also simple. And Nicola Griffith does a wonderful job of describing the everyday life of people living at this time. So, you know, making honey and butchering animals and growing the flax that will be woven into the linen and running, you know, villages and running kingdoms and trading and the relationships. There was a fluidity in the sexuality that Nicola Griffith explored, which I loved. There was a lot of representation of different types of people living differently, so with disabilities, with different ways of functioning in society based on their talents, but also, striving for power and battle and becoming who you really are and loving and losing. And there's just so much. They're epic. They're very long, but there's nothing in here that shouldn't be in here, in my opinion. There's nothing superfluous. There's nothing that is boring. You just are wrapped up in this character. She is so powerful, so deep, so thoughtful. I think it's a life-affirming story, as is Hild. So by the time Hild was in her 30s, she entered into an abbey. And so these books take place before that time in her life when she was younger, and take some liberties around what she may have done at that time in her life. And just super, super interesting. She was leading men. She was a big woman. She had a different fate than a lot of other women of the time. And there was, she was an exception. It wasn't like there were a lot of women who were in those positions, but there were women here and there who were. I like thinking of the past that way, that there were chances for women to challenge, the gender roles that became so rigid years later. But there were women always challenging these roles. But I think the way Nicola Griffith creates this world, it feels very real, it feels very believable, and it feels possible that this was a possible way that people were functioning back at that time. So despite the fact that this great big book threw off all of my reading for November, and I only finished 3 books in November because I was reading this big guy, I don't regret a minute of it because I enjoyed this so much. So I got both Hild and Menewood from the library, and I will most likely be purchasing these to keep them in my collection because I think I could reread these. I think they're just so rich, and again, it's such a beautiful world to be part of, even though there's horrible, terrible things that happen in the story. But it's just such beautiful nature writing, such intricate connection to the wider world, to a spiritual way of looking at the world. She's just an incredible character. So I would highly recommend these if you like fantasy, you would probably like these because they have an ethereal quality to them, even though they are based in reality, that I think fantasy lovers would enjoy. They're just really great novels, and I'm really, really glad that I read this one. All right, so I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hi all, I wanted to check in about the second audiobook that I just finished for the month of December. I'm on a mission to complete my reading goal for the year, so I added in another one. This one was not in my TBR video for the month. So after reading my previous audiobook, which was romance, I decided to go for a totally different vibe, and I picked out Kissing Christmas Goodbye by MC Beaton. And this is actually a pseudonym for Marion Chesney. No, I forgot her other name. But anyway, it's a pseudonym. She is a writer of many, many books, including a whole bunch of romance and different things. But now, or then, she was writing the Agatha Raisin series. And so this is number 18 in the Agatha Raisin series. It was very entertaining. It's got that British witty charm to it that a lot of those styles of cozy mysteries do. I think a little bit too much fat shaming language for me. A little bit too much female look commentary, I would say, which can often be the case in those types of books written by people of certain generations, maybe, who would have been more comfortable in using terms that are just kind of derogatory and mean. But there's also that level of wit and kind of irreverence and humor that works into that sort of language. So in those ways it worked, but in other ways it was just kind of mean and not good. But yeah, this takes place in a little town in the Cotswolds, and Agatha Raisin is a private detective who is hired mostly by people getting divorces and runs an office. And she receives a letter in the mail from a lady of a manor saying that she believes her children are going to try to kill her on her birthday. And so Agatha is brought in to try to figure out who might be killing this woman. And the mystery ensues from there. It's pretty charming. There's a big cast of characters. Obviously, as this is the 18th book, I'm sure a lot of the characters were introduced earlier. There is a new young woman who comes into the agency in this story named Tony, and she's Antonia has some like competitiveness with her because Agatha is a middle-aged woman, and she feels like being around a 17-year-old makes her feel bad about herself, but I think she redeems herself in some ways in the story. So yeah, it was very entertaining. It was a quick listen, and the narrator was very good. And so, yeah, I would say I would recommend it with the caveats that, you know, it was written in 2008, I think, or 2006. So I think the newer books in this style are not quite so derogatory about the way women look, hopefully, because it's kind of annoying to read that, but otherwise I enjoyed reading it, and I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey everyone, so today is December 23rd. I finished another book. I'm 3 books away from my 75 books. I don't know if I'm gonna make it. Part of me wants to try to push myself and see if I can do it. And another part of me wants to just take it easy and read at my leisure. But I did want to get this one done. This is The Debatable Land, The Lost World Between Scotland and England by Robb. Okay, so when I read the synopsis for this book, I thought there was going to be more memoir to it because Robb and his wife moved to this area, but it's in England where he lives. But he talks about this really specific area between Scotland and England's border that was called the Debatable Land for hundreds of years. And this land was deemed a land that was only usable by farmers to like graze their sheep, or you couldn't like erect a permanent dwelling. You couldn't live there. You couldn't own this land. It was kind of this ambiguous land, but they did set up some laws to protect it. And Robb started investigating this once he and his wife moved to a house that was within this land, and they explored it on their bicycles. I was hoping that would be more part of the book, and it was actually very little included in the book. Near the end, there was some great nature description that I really liked of the land and of moving through it, which is what I was hoping it would be more of. Instead, Robb went into the historical records and really pulled up the stories and the political situations surrounding this land, the history surrounding the land. And some of it was interesting, and other parts of it I didn't find as interesting. One part that I did find interesting was these people called the Reavers, and they were thieves, essentially. They would steal other people's livestock. Some of them were very violent and did terrible things. Others were just thieves, and there was kind of this this idea of land, no, sorry, not land, but animals being a more common property that you could abscond with or something, that they kind of like. So this is kind of this not quite Robin Hood-esque, but very on some level charming view of property. And one of my personal stories of my Scottish heritage as a Johnston was that we were at some point excommunicated from Scotland because we were sheep thieves or something like that. And so I thought, oh, perhaps my family were reavers because we were supposedly from like southern Scotland, not from the Highlands. But there were no Johnstons listed in the names. There were quite a few names that were listed. That doesn't mean they weren't there, but just that he didn't put them in the book. So I found that interesting. And then the stories of the individuals who ran these kind of gangs and who, it was a really kind of ambiguous time legally for these people. And there was also this kind of interesting interplay between the England and Scotland, and the people living in this area kind of are similar in some ways in terms of their accents and in terms of their way of looking at the world, because they live in this geographical similar place. They have more similarities than they might have to someone, Scottish living, on the Isle of Skye or something like that, or someone in England living in London. Like, they just have this geography in common. So that was interesting too. He also gets into the 2014 referendum that Scotland voted, where they voted no for independence. They were considering becoming independent from England. And he also talks about Brexit very briefly near the end, and how Scottish people, it seemed, were more inclined to remain part of the European Union, and the English people were more inclined to leave. So, interesting things like that. But again, this was kind of a small portion of the book. Oh, there's a lot of maps in here. So I would say this was good, but I would have preferred more memoir. I would have preferred more personal reflections. And I think maybe he reflected personally as much as he tends to do in his books, because he really does stick to the history. And so I doubt I would seek out another book by him, because when I'm consuming any sort of historical information, I really prefer there to be more memoir woven in, because that's what the human part of it is more interesting to me than the kind of more historical, factual part. So I think there was a bit too much like information dumping for me, more than I would have preferred. So yeah, so that's The Debatable Land by Graham Robb. Okay, so it'll remain to be seen how many more times I check in with you. I may have got an audiobook on the go, and I've got a fiction book on the go, and I have another fiction book, which is the Christmas one, that I could start. I was thinking of starting at Christmas Day and just like seeing if I get through it. I don't know. It's a mystery at this point in the video if I'm going to reach the 75 books or not. So I will check in again with you to let you know what happens next. Hi, everyone. Okay, book number 73 of 2025 is The Mirror and the Palette, Rebellion, Revolution, and Resilience, 500 Years of Women's Self-Portraits by Jennifer Higgie. This was the final book in my Patreon book club read for 2025. Book club read for 2025. And we read it over the months of October, November, and December. So I really enjoyed this. This has a good overview of lots of different female artists who have not received a lot of recognition over the years. There are some like Frida Kahlo, Alice Neal, Artemisia Gentileschi, who are more known. But I always have to remind myself that I know more female artists than the average person does. And so if you are not very familiar with female artists, then this book might be a good way to get some overview about some different artists working in different eras, all of them pretty much in painters, because, the self-portrait is really something that is done in that kind of medium. And so it's a good way to kind of learn more about women artists. There's kind of an overarching theme as well, where the self-portraits are kind of being talked about, being reflected on as a way that women artists have used to understand themselves, to depict themselves, to take up space, essentially, in a very male-dominated field. I kind of wish there was a bit more of that in the book, a bit more. She kind of creates a storytelling narrative around that, making the female artist have kind of a narrative story of her evolution, relating it to the different stories pulled together through the different artists she's representing. But I feel like there could have been a bit more exploring in terms of an art historical perspective on what those self-portraits mean in the larger context of art history. So for me, I kind of wanted to have her say, like, these portraits are prove these women existed, that these women took space up in their time period, regardless of whether or not the conventional art historical canon included them. They were there, and they wrote about themselves, or they painted themselves. Some of them did write about themselves as well, documenting their place in history. There were several Australian and New Zealand artists in here that I had not heard of before. Not as many artists of color, because, again, the canon very much struggles to find these women unless they were written about in a more conventional Western narrative. They aren't usually included in these kind of broader views, because they weren't exposed to the, art historical writers and people. They weren't showing in the places that were conventional. They weren't being written about by the critics, and so there's less information about them that can be unearthed. But there are some amazing art historians who are doing that work now, feminist historians as well, who are, who have dug deep to find that information and to bring it out into light. These are some of the artists in this book created hundreds of works over decades. Some of them had lives that were cut short by, illness or sudden death, but a lot of them worked quite long into their lives, and some of them never even achieved recognition for their work until late in their lives. So, I think there's a lot here, and I think it's a good book. It's a good book in the context of, female art history, keeping these names to the bringing names to the forefront, keeping names in the forefront, keeping experiences of women in the forefront for people. So you can read about these women, they existed. And as a female artist myself, I find that very reassuring, because it feels like, I'm not working in this anonymous vacuum where my work will just be sucked into some dark corner once I'm gone and no one will know who I was. I feel like there will be the potential to be remembered as an artist in some capacity. So that is The Mirror and the Palette. And I will check in again with you. I am in the middle of 2 books right now, and it is the 27th today. So I have 5 days to finish 2 books, so we'll see how I do. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so I finished The 10-Year Nap by Meg Wolitzer last night. I have really mixed feelings about this book. It had a lot in it, and I think at times it had too much in it, like too much different stuff going on. At its heart, it's a story about, I would say, female friendship. It's a story about middle age. It's a story about being married and being in middle age. So the main character is Amy Lamb, living in New York City with her husband Leo. They met at the law firm where he still works. She stopped working when she got pregnant and had their son, Mason. And she's been home with him since she gave birth for about 10 years. And so all of the main women in this story, there's 4 friends, but the story really only focuses a lot on 3 of the 4 friends. Amy being the main one, then Jill, then Roberta, and then Karen. They've all been at home with their kids, not working outside the home very much, or if at all, during this 10-year period, which is going from about their 30s to their 40s. And they all have different marriages, different situations. Some of them still live in New York City. Some of them have moved to the suburbs. And so it explores a lot of things about being middle-aged, about being a woman, about being married, about being a parent. It explores a lot about the kind of city versus suburban idea. It explores a lot about comparison between women, so comparing yourself to other women whose kids go to the same school as yours. The grass is always greener. A lot is like the ideas come out. So, is her life better than my life? Am I pathetic because because I've lost my way? All of them have kind of lost their way, and all of them struggle with it quite a lot in the story. And there's a lot. The reason I kept reading was because of that kind of exploration. I found that, the delivery was often a bit clunky for me, and the characters were a bit like their internal dialogue was maybe a bit too black and white. There was the nuances of living and being middle-aged and experiencing these types of problems could have been explored more. There were also these vignettes throughout the story in between the chapters of women from previous generations. So often each of their mothers was talked about, and a kind of short 3 or 4 page scene from each of their mothers' lives, and sort of comparing the generations and the problems that each generation had. So that was also interesting. But again, there was this kind of, it felt like a lot was thrown into this book, and I felt like it could have been edited a little better for my taste to be a bit more put more effort into some of the characters rather than others, and to weave those stories into the main narrative rather than separating them out, I think would have made it a little bit less all over the place. It just felt all over the place to me a lot of the time. That being said, I think that this book is unique in a lot of ways. These issues that are brought up in here about, feeling lost in middle age, about being a parent and of putting a lot of time into that, but then also needing or wanting to have something that's just yours, and how you find that when you've lost yourself, when you don't know who you are anymore, when all the promise that you had when you were young and, just graduating or going to college and coming out changes because you've changed your priorities in life and you've had a family. Like, all of these questions are really important things that should be talked about. And so I do appreciate the fact that Meg Wolitzer talks about them in this book. There's a lot of privilege here. I would say the stories, while trying to be diverse, are really pretty privileged stories in a lot of ways. And this book was written in, a post 9/11 New York and published in 2008. So there's a lot of like this kind of, these women were older, not millennials, they were Gen X, and they were, a kind of a lot of the parenting issues that come up for millennials now. So yeah, that's also an interesting perspective to think about when you're thinking about the issues that they're facing in this book, which I think have changed a lot in the last 20 years. So yeah, I think it's an interesting look at a very specific time period and in a very specific experience. And she, like I said, she did try to put a lot of nuance into some of it, but then other things were not as nuanced, and other things were, I don't know, there was not much of a plot in here. And I think for some people, like even for me, who's not really a plot reader, the way the story progresses when these women are struggling with these issues and they don't really have, there's not really a through line in the plot. You're just kind of following them as they struggle through, a 6-month period of their lives. Might be a bit boring for some people, potentially. Anyway, it's one of those books that has a lot of ideas in it, but they don't necessarily get resolved or feel satisfied. You don't necessarily feel satisfied by the resolutions that she comes up with, because in a lot of ways, she's not exploring the issues with enough depth. So there's a lot of things are touched upon and then left. And so you have to kind of be willing to not have that kind of sense of satisfaction, which I think in some ways is realistic to how real life is, and in other ways is a little bit frustrating. Okay, so today is December 29th. I have 2 more books to finish if I am going to get 75. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think I'm feeling up to trying. So I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey everyone. Okay, so I am wrapping up December, my reading in December, with The End of Drum Time by Hanna Pylvainen. And I listened to this on audio. And this is my last book of the year. So I ended up reading 74 books. I didn't hit 75. I really enjoyed this novel. This novel is set in 1851 in the Nordic tundra. So an area that's very much a mixture of multiple countries. It's Norway, Finland, which is not really Finland at the time, Russia, Sweden. They all kind of, it's a defined place for in terms of kings and the European countries, but this is around the Sami culture, and this is indigenous culture that is from this area. And so they are reindeer herders. So they move with the herds. And there are settler people living in this little village that the story starts in. And so you get multiple perspectives from settlers, from Sami, and it's a story of the evolution of colonization. It's a story about religion and the kind of taking over of a culture by the colonizing European culture, the things they systematically did to like remove more and more of the Sami culture and rights. And it's told through these very compelling characters, preachers, young people coming of age, falling in love, the reindeer herders who are just trying to preserve their way of life but are struggling with alcohol. There's actually struggles with alcohol all around, living in a very dark, cold place. So it was really perfect in terms of atmosphere to read in December. I would say any wintry time, or whenever you're kind of craving a kind of winter atmosphere, then this book would be great for that. It has some sadness and some bittersweetness. There's not a happy ending. The characters go through a lot physically to endure their conditions, but also emotionally around their loss of culture, struggles between parents and children, struggles between sisters. There's a really strong sister narrative that goes through the story as well. And I think it also really evokes the Sami culture. Obviously, I think this is the only novel I've read, or the first time I've read about Sami culture. So, I can't say that it embodies it perfectly because I really am not an expert on that, but I found it very evocative, and the story and the way that European sensibilities were inflicting themselves upon Indigenous sensibilities really resonated with me in terms of the reading that I've done around the same situation here in Canada. So I would recommend this one. I think it's definitely not a feel-good fun story, but it's got a lot of beauty in it and a lot of subtlety to relationship. It's very embodied, and by that I mean the characters are very real, and there's a lot of characters, but the way the story is told, you are moving from character to character, but it's not in an abrupt way. I felt very easy moving between them, and I did really like the narration as well. The narrator was able to differentiate voices just enough to give them a sense of realness, but he didn't. Sometimes I find when narrators put on a voice for a character, the voice can be irritating, and I didn't get irritated by any of the voices in this one. So that is the end of Drum Time by Hanna Pylvainen, and that is my last book of December. And wow, what a reading year. But I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.